of what this man, who claims he can be the next Prime Minister of this country, what he did yesterday in America. Of course, we're talking about Nigel Farage. Don't talk about Nigel Farage every day. But we're talking about free speech. We're talking about whether he's patriotic. We're talking about whether you want to put your faith in him. And the answer from you, Neil, seems to be a resounding yes. Fine. You've used your free speech.
Have you ever seen a politician leave their own country and criticize it from abroad? Well, that's exactly what's happened, and it's causing a political firestorm. Nigel Farage has made controversial remarks about the UK while in the United States, and the reactions have been intense. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's take a look at what was said, how people reacted, and whether this controversy is being blown out of proportion, or if Farage really crossed a line.
It is unprecedented for a leader of a UK political party to go to another country and slag off his own country. And that's what he was doing in the most disgraceful way. Now, I have concerns about some aspects of freedom of speech in this country, but I wouldn't go to a foreign committee to express them. Well, of course, what he admitted to say was that America has this same issue. In fact, it's far worse in America. Free speech is protected under Section 2 of the American Constitution. And yet, the American government, led by Donald Trump, now forces anybody who goes to America to say what their social media feeds are. And when your application for a visa is considered, the American embassy in the relevant country goes through your social media feed to see if you are an appropriate person to be allowed into the country. Now, that is a restriction of British freedom of speech. So I'm obviously flabbergasted that Nigel Farage didn't mention that in front of this committee. But to go abroad and say these things, particularly on a day when he should have been in the British Parliament scrutinising the government and asking a question in Prime Minister's questions, I think it is an outrage for Nigel Farage to do this. But let's stick to the issue and talk about whether you feel that freedom of speech is under threat in this country. Because he quoted the Lucy Connolly incident where she was sentenced to, what was it, sort of 30 months in prison for a very, very intemperate Facebook post that I didn't think that she should have been sent to prison. I thought it was incitement. And I mean, and let's face it, she and indeed Graham Linehan weren't arrested or charged under the Online Safety Act, as Nigel Farage seemed to think they were. They were both charged under the 1985, or was it 1986, Public Order Act. So, I mean, obviously Graham Linehan hasn't yet been charged, but Lucy Connolly was. She was tried and sent to prison.
I think it's kind of faux outrage about what Nigel Farage has done. I think, first of all, he was invited there by the Congressional Committee. And when I watched most of the Congressional Committee meeting, you know, the media picked out certain little bits where Nigel wasn't actually allowed to reply, and he was criticised for saying, "I'll have a coffee while you're ranting on." I thought that was quite funny, actually,
like when he said, "Can someone get me a coffee?"
Yeah, because he was bored, because he literally couldn't get a word in edgeways.
No, he couldn't.
But a lot of the reason they were discussing things with Nigel, you know, is potentially the next Prime Minister of the country. So he is an influential person in terms of how the country's relationship with the USA could be in 4 years' time. But also, they've got real concerns about the potential fines that can be imposed on massive corporations in America. Some of their biggest companies, you know, billions and billions of pounds, 10% of their turnover they could be fined for under a law that's been passed in the UK. Now, that's surely relevant to a congressional committee in America. And to say, oh, Nigel should have been at PMQs, if you think PMQs is a useful part of our democracy, then I give up, because it is a shouting match between
Neil,
two people.
It can be. Listen, you'll get no disagreement from me that it is largely ridiculous, but it is important still. It's about the Prime Minister showing up, being challenged, and if Kemi Badenoch or whoever's in that position at any one time doesn't use it, well, what can you do? But there are moments. There are
moments. Keir Starmer doesn't use it well, Sheila. Keir Starmer doesn't use it well. All he does is you can almost predict what the questions and the answers are going to be, and that's part of the reason why Nigel is doing so well in the polls, because he might say things that are controversial. The thing about North Korea, absolutely ridiculous, but by God, it's got a headline today and it's got people talking, and yeah, that's what Trump did in a way. He'd say outrageous things, but it got people talking, and people are fed up of this kind of stale PR speak that comes out from the government. You'll have seen today, and Femi fell into it before, and he's probably joined the club, but suddenly Nigel is unpatriotic and talking Britain down. So many ministers this has been fed to them in the last 24 hours. The Prime Minister used it. The minister on Nick Ferrari's programme used it this morning. So the
formulaic language, it's tedious.
They've forgotten further and faster, and now it's unpatriotic and talking the country down. From Keir Starmer, who's stood in the garden and said how bad it was all going to be and how dreadful the country was for months and months and months, and talked this country down.
Hang on,
it's
Neil.
Ridiculous.
You listen again. I find their formulaic answers unbelievably enraging. I can't stand it. Just talk normally, and plenty of them can and do. People like Wes Streeting, he talks normally at you. He speaks like a normal human being.
I'd debate that, but there we are.
Well, I think he does. You might not. I'm not saying you necessarily agree with what he says all the time, but he addresses the question you've asked in a normal human way.
He does come out with the same scripted responses that they all come out with. So if there's a difficult subject to talk about,
not in my conversations
this morning, it was make sure you roll out that Nigel Farage is unpatriotic, and make sure you roll out that he's talking Britain down. But they all play that game,
Neil,
and that's what we're bored of.
All right, I hear you. I'm bored of it too. Would you say there was a difference? I would say there was a difference between the following. Keir Starmer, I think, mistakenly being too dreary and downbeat when he first became Prime Minister. You can be realistic and still bring hope to the table, and I think that was a mistake on his part. But what he wasn't doing was exaggerating the state of things. He was just only telling us the bad state of things, and that's a political mistake, I think. What Nigel Farage did was, in a foreign country, sat and said, Britain is now like North Korea. That is a disgrace for somebody who wants to be Prime Minister of this country. Don't you dare compare this country to North Korea.
I don't agree that we're like North Korea. I think we've got some issues, but I think he does it for a particular reason. He does it for the same reason Trump used to say the outrageous things in his election campaign, because you're talking about it, and we're talking about it. And who are we talking about? We're talking about Nigel Farage. And that's what he is trying to stop happening, and that's what the Labour government's trying to stop doing. They're panicking. So for 1 minute they were pretending to be reform to try and counter them, and now they're saying he's unpatriotic, so they've changed their stance.
Hang on. Keir Starmer has zero influence over what I or anybody else at LBC, Sky, BBC. He has no influence over who puts what in their programmes and what stories we cover. Ditto the newspapers, none whatsoever. If he's countering Nigel Farage, he's countering him politically, and we are reporting on it. That's all.
Yeah, I understand that.
He's not running the show. He's not trying to silence Farage politically. He's not. He knows he can't do that. He's criticising him politically. That's legit.
But I'm saying Nigel Farage is a clever operator, because what are you talking about today?
I was talking about Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner.
You're talking about Nigel Farage, and you've had Neon's kind of justifying some of his actions, and then you've had the Lemon Moran hating chap on before, who was also defending him and talking about free speech in the UK. And I think he went far too far about free speech in the UK. But we're talking about Nigel Farage.
That's all right, but that's okay. Of course we're talking about Nigel Farage. At the opening of the programme, of the hour, I asked what you thought of what this man, who claims he can be the next Prime Minister of this country, what he did yesterday in America. Of course we're talking about Nigel Farage. Don't talk about Nigel Farage every day. But we're talking about free speech. We're talking about whether he's patriotic. We're talking about whether you want to put your faith in him. And the answer from you, Neil, seems to be a resounding yes. Fine. You've used your free speech to tell me.
So after watching that entire exchange, one thing really stands out. If Nigel Farage travels abroad and delivers such harsh criticism of Britain, it's hard to understand why pointing that out is somehow considered fake outrage. Whether you agree with him or not, it's a fair question to ask if that's the image someone who wants to lead the country should be presenting on an international stage. What also caught my attention was the clear double standard. You get the feeling that if almost any other major British politician had gone overseas and made the same kind of comments, many of Farage's supporters would have been the first to condemn it. But because it's Farage, suddenly it's defended as clever political strategy. And that's where Neil's argument becomes interesting. In trying to defend Farage, he actually reinforces the criticism. He openly acknowledges that comparing Britain to North Korea was an outrageous comparison, but then argues that it worked because it grabbed headlines. That may explain the strategy, but it doesn't necessarily justify the message. Creating controversy is one thing. Whether it's responsible is another question entirely. The same applies to the argument that Farage was invited to speak before the Congressional Committee. Nobody is saying he shouldn't have accepted the invitation. The criticism isn't about showing up. It's about what he chose to say once he got there. Then there's the debate over skipping Prime Minister's questions. You can certainly argue that PMQs has become overly theatrical and repetitive, and many people do. But that still doesn't answer whether missing it was the right decision or whether representing Britain abroad in that way was appropriate. Perhaps the most revealing moment was the comparison to Donald Trump's campaign style. The suggestion was essentially that making bold, controversial statements keeps everyone talking. And clearly it does. We're all discussing it now. But generating headlines isn't the same as making a strong argument, and publicity alone doesn't settle whether the criticism was fair. At the end of the day, this entire debate raises a bigger question about leadership, accountability, and political strategy. But what do you think? Did Nigel Farage cross the line, or is this simply politics as usual? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.